Hello, BookTube. I'm Jonathan, and today we are going to be talking about two of my favorite subgenres in science fiction. And in order to do that, I have recruited Whitney from the secret source of Storycraft. Hi, Whitney. Whitney, I heard you read some space opera recently. How was your space opera September?
Oh man, it was packed full of a lot of space. Gotta say, I got some good picks for you today.
Nice. Ooh, I like it. So, I did a cyberpunk September, and I do have to admit, though, that the first book in Otherland by Tad Williams is about, and don't quote me on this, I think around 14,000 pages long. So that did take up most of my September, so my cyberpunk September became September and October. But we're here now, and I've picked out my three favorites that I read in September and October, and Whitney has picked out some of her favorite space opera books. So we're going to compare. Let us know which of these two favorite genres you enjoy and which of our recommendations you're most interested to try. So, Whitney, as the guest, I will let you go first. What is your first space opera recommendation?
Okay, well, as you know, space opera has lots of definitions. So we're going
Yep.
with the definition I used in September, which is it has to occur most of the plot in space. So
Good
that's just
rule.
the easiest one I'm going to go with. So that's the one I'm sticking to. So for
I
my
like it.
first choice, I am going to cheat just a little bit and give you a whole trilogy of books. This is
Ooh,
the Isaac
nice.
Asimov Foundation trilogy. So this is the original first three books, and there's a reason why I'm doing all three, but let me tell you a little bit about them first.
Fair.
So the first book follows a man named Harry Seldon, who's a scientist who has developed this theory using both mathematics and sociology to predict the future of large groups of humans. And he's applied this theory and found out that the empire is going to collapse and there's no way to fix it. And the emperor doesn't like this, as you can imagine. So he
Yep.
puts him on trial. And the rest of the books follow multi generations of Harry Seldon's followers and what happens. These books are particularly interesting because they were the first ones to ever show like multi-planetary human empires with no aliens, with multi-generation, and they're really big deals in the classic science fiction world. So if you haven't
Absolutely.
read them, you have to check them out. Now, the reason why I did all three is because I have to tell you, while I liked the first book, Foundation was really a good read. The second book, Foundation and Empire, is my all-time favorite for this trilogy. So I have to mention
Ooh,
it because
interesting.
you can't read this book without reading the first one, of course. But the best secrets, the best twists, the most clever parts of this series are definitely in the second book, and they continue on into the third book. So I'm gonna recommend the entire trilogy to you.
That's interesting because I know Michael from Fit to Be Read, our friend, he's also a fan of the second book. I actually like the first one the most.
Oh, really?
I agree with you. Well, I'm going to guess you have a similar take that the best character, I'm not going to give it away, but the best character is in book two. I would agree
Yes,
with that. But
I
I
would
enjoyed
agree.
the stories the most in the first. And I think it's fair to include all of them though, because they were short stories, originally eight short stories that completed a tale of Foundation, and then they were split into three novels. I believe Asimov added an intro from the original stories to make the first book. So they do complete a story, even though it's kind of told in little chunks. And yeah, I'm a fan, but I like the first one the most.
Wow. Well, I'm like you're an outlier, I must say.
Uh oh. Uh
Uh-oh.
oh.
But I think that's great. I mean, all of these books are fantastic and they're so accessible. They don't really overwhelm you with the science that a lot of other space opera books do. So that's one of the reasons why they have to be on this list for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes people confuse classic sci-fi with hard sci-fi because I
Mhm.
hear this book referred to as hard sci-fi a lot, and they go, "Oh, it's about psychohistory," and I'm like, "Yeah, but psychohistory is basically magic. Like it's such an advanced form of statistics that it's like it's almost fantastical. It's
Mhm.
really much more about social sciences to do with What's to do with like politics and trade and economics and technology and power and relationships. And I think it's
Mhm.
even though it is a little dry, it does feel classic in terms of more focusing on the ideas than the characters. I think it's more accessible to a new sci-fi reader than some people might give it credit for.
I would agree. And I would also say that my most favorite theme from this book is definitely, can one individual matter? I think that's a
Mm,
really cool idea to explore.
interesting. Awesome. So I'm a fan
Mhm.
of the first book in particular. Vote in the comments down below which is the best foundation book.
Uh-oh, uh-oh, we're starting this rivalry thing again.
I might lose. I'm not feeling confident, but I don't know. We'll see.
Mm, right.
The audience will decide. Okay, my first cyberpunk book that I'm going to recommend is Accelerando by Charles Stross.
Mm,
So this is interesting, also kind of told in a bit of a short story format. Essentially, there are 9 stories, and there are 3 time periods, 3 stories within each of these subsections.
mhm,
And it follows pre-singularity, during a technological singularity, and then we have a post-singularity setting. So if that's an interest of yours, I think this could be a really interesting book to try. This one definitely is hard sci-fi. I said that Foundation wasn't that hard. Charles Stross really dives into the technology here. I'm going to put this probably at number 1 of
ooh,
books with the most technobabble. You, if you don't
wow.
like technological word salad, maybe stay away from Accelerando. If you like that kind of thing, I think Charles Stross, his imagination when it comes to the way that people will start to interact with technology, have technology embedded within them, the way that artificial intelligences are just going to get more and more and more and more intelligent until a future that is almost incomprehensible to the current human mind, unless you're a borderline genius like Charles Stross himself, is going to be able to conceive. I personally really loved the first story because I felt like I was still able to somewhat grasp onto some familiar concepts and ideas. It felt like a cyberpunk story, like a near future cyberpunk story, with some kind of interesting, weird, quirky, kinky characters. As we got into parts 2 and 3, I really liked the ideas, but I lost a little bit of the investment in the story and the characters.
Hmm.
But if you're a fan of the ideas that I mentioned, I think you're still going to enjoy parts 2 and 3 because, you know, Strauss cranks those up to 11. He really, really goes for it. This is a very ambitious book. So if that's the kind of thing you're into, check out Accelerando.
Were parts 2 and 3, like, would you consider them cyberpunk still or not quite yet?
It sort of became almost post cyberpunk. It
Mm.
went into from cyberpunk to almost space opera to almost just theoretical mind melt, genreless sci-fi.
I can't wait to see your review that says "theoretical mind melt."
Yeah.
I hope you include that in
Okay.
your review.
Yeah, Charles Stross, if there's a re-release, you can put that on the cover.
Yeah, yeah. Direct quote, Jonathan, words in time, like it. Well, I've not read
Awesome.
that one, although it has been on my list for a long time. I always look up several different authors, and Charles Strauss comes up a lot, specifically for that book. So at some point or another, I'm hoping to read that one, maybe next year.
Yeah, this was my first Stross book. I'll be interested to try him again. I think he has Halting State and a couple others that are fairly well regarded. One that I believe is which utilizes the second person, which I know is very polarizing. So it'll be interesting to try that one. Yeah, I think this is not a bad place to start though with Stross.
Okay. All right, I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, I like it. All right, Whitney, what is your second space opera recommendation?
All right. So I wanted to have a variety of options for you. And I know that one of the things that happened during Space Opera September is a lot of people said they kind of tend to avoid space operas because everything is in like 15, 14, 20 books long. And
Okay,
they're like, I
yeah,
just don't
yeah.
have time for that. So I wanted to include a standalone science fiction space opera book here.
Appreciate it.
So I picked Seven Eves by Neil Stevenson.
Very nice.
So is this one that you've read, Jonathan?
I've not. I've only read Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson.
Oh,
Although a friend of mine, Ezra, is a big fan of Seven Eves, recommended that one to me. So I do want to try it at some point.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to read at least one Neil Stephenson book a year. This one was mine for
Nice.
this year. This book is incredible because it has one of the all-time best first lines of a story I've ever read. Um, and it starts with the moon exploding, literally first
Okay.
sentence. And when the moon explodes, as you can imagine, it breaks into multiple pieces that orbit around the Earth, but they're in a decaying orbit. So we find out that Earth has 2 years before we're going to have huge pieces of the moon falling into Earth. It's going to be an apocalyptic, unsurvivable event.
Oh,
And
that's not
so
good.
all of humanity only has 2 years to figure out we're in it for the long game, friends. How are we going to make it to where humans survive? So the first two-thirds of this book
Interesting.
are all about trying to get everything together. He goes through things like logistics on how do we get everything up? How are we going to get all of the nations to work together? How are who's going to get chosen? Like all of the things. It gets very complicated. I would definitely call it hard science fiction, although don't worry, it doesn't get too economical. Um,
Okay.
and he really focuses on how and what we would do and the steps that we would take to get this to happen. There is also like a little cool underlying subtle subplot here about the psychology of working towards something that you won't be chosen for. Like
Mm,
99% of humans will die. So they're working
uh-oh.
for something that they know they're not going to get to help in or survive with, which is kind of a different
Interesting.
vibe than I expected. But then the third part, because there's part one, part two, part three happens. And the third part is the most controversial part of this book. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it
Ah,
because it changes tone, it changes time period, and it becomes a lot more speculative fiction. You take what happens in book one and two and see all the consequences many generations forward. And some people love it and some people don't. I'm clearly recommending it, so I'm in the group that likes it. But it is definitely controversial and it is kind of a fun debate to have. I really thought that his ideas were really interesting to explore. For me, what made this book fantastic was that last third of the book. It was amazing.
interesting. And it's quite a long book, isn't it? How many pages
Yeah.
approximately? Yeah, chunky.
Yeah. Well, the font size is actually pretty big, but it
Okay,
is on the
not too bad.
epilogue. My copy is 861
Yeah.
pages.
You're like, ah, it's not that bad. Only
Yeah.
860 pages.
Yeah. I mean, whatever. You read Pandora's Star. How many pages is
I,
that?
I'm not judging. I'm not judging. That was a segue into a thought that when you have a book that is really long and it takes a bit of a shift, on the one hand, a reader might think, you know what, I was enjoying what it was doing, but after 500, 600 pages, I was ready for something new, and it really kind of hits the spot. It scratches that itch, that new direction that it
Mhm.
goes. Whereas on the other hand, a reader could think, I was enjoying this for 500 pages. I invested all this time, and then you took me in a completely different direction that I did not want to go. So,
That is
I,
exactly the controversy. And
yes,
and believe it or not, despite it being a really long book, once you get into that one third, that last third of the book, I really was sad. I felt like, we spent so many pages with the first part of the story that I wanted equal amount of pages with the second part of the story. So
gotcha.
I wanted more, actually. I felt like it felt
Hey,
rushed at the end. So I
that's
also have a theory about this book that if he had taken that last third and put it as kind of like the prequel and then showed and then gone back in time, I think that
ooh,
people would be happier with it, but I'm not sure.
interesting. All right. Well,
All
Neil Stevenson, if you're looking for a new editor, Whitney is available. She's got she's
for
got a lot
free,
of
man.
opinions on structure. I like it.
Yeah.
I I think I would find that interesting because think that Stevenson probably dives into a lot of details, but when I was reading Snow Crash, I actually didn't mind his info dumps. I actually think he
He's good
dumps
at them.
interesting information. I think he's quite good at it.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
So I think I would be on board. and I definitely need to read more Stevenson because I was a fan of Snow Crash.
Mhm.
That one, Diamond Age, Anthem. He has quite the well-regarded bibliography. So
It really does.
yeah, maybe I
I
need to bump Seveneves up the list.
well, I would recommend it. I think it would be an interesting discussion for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, for my second cyberpunk recommendation, I haven't been able to shut up about this author for the last year. It's Greg Egan with Diaspora. So
Ooh.
Greg Egan, shout out fellow Aussie Australian author Greg Egan. Permutation City was my favorite book that I read in 2022 and one of my favorite books of all time. So I was very excited to read Diaspora. And the premise for this one is that at the start of the book, we're around 1,000 years in the future. And we have humans that have essentially become digital entities, live sort of a digital artificial existence. Then we have humans that have become what are known as Goliaths. They live in robots. So, sort of a combination of human and artificial uh, physicality and intelligence capabilities. And then we have holdouts, humans that say, I don't want anything to do with that technological nonsense. That's not the way to go about life. And they're known as fleshers. So they're still living in the flesh. And the story kind of takes us through what it is like to be an artificial intelligence, how that is born in a sense, how it develops, and how it goes about tackling huge questions to do with life and physics and the universe. And again, this one is very hard sci-fi. I happened to pick some hard sci-fi books this month, not really on purpose, but if you like mathematics, if you like physics, if you want to really explore the way certain star systems might work, or if gravity were to change, or how sort of messages could be written in code within the DNA or molecular biology of something on a different planet, Greg Egan takes you there. His level of intelligence and imagination and creativity is almost second to none that I have read in science fiction. However, I did not enjoy this one as much as Permutation City because Permutation City, I really like the characters and I really like the story. Whereas in Diaspora, I think the ideas are just nuts. I was intellectually stimulated, but I don't think I emotionally connected to the
Mhm.
story in this one. It felt a little bit like reading a textbook, an entertaining textbook, but a textbook nonetheless.
Is that
Sometimes
even possible? I don't think
I,
that's a real thing.
I
I don't know.
you'll have to read it. You have to read and tell me. That's often a criticism of hard sci-fi.
Mhm.
People say, "Oh, it reads like a textbook,"
Hmm.
and if you are science averse, I can see how that might sometimes be the case. But I usually find a story, an emotional connection, a reason to keep reading.
Hmm.
Yeah, this one was pretty cold and hard. I
Hmm.
liked it, but I didn't love it as much as Permutation City. But if that's your jam, I think it's going to go. Yeah, it
Mhm.
it hits the science if that's what you're looking for.
Were you able to follow most of what he's saying, or was it
No,
so far out you were like, I don't know what's happening?
no, very loosely.
Mhm.
I I would understand sort of the concept or the topic or the reason why they wanted to investigate a certain thing,
Mhm.
why getting an answer to a certain thing would have meaning to that character or what that would mean for upcoming events in the story. But the actual science itself, no, not no, I'm not even going to pretend
Okay.
even a
Well,
little bit.
I can respect that. I think that's fine. It's ironic because I own both of these books. I own Permutation City and Diaspora, and I have them on my list of books that I'm going to read next year. I just decided that they might be a little bit heavy for the holiday. So I probably need to spend a little bit more like concentrated time on them. But I'm really excited to pick them up. I've heard so many people talk about how awesome Permutation City is. And a lot of other people are recommending Diaspora. And of course, I'm friends with Michael from Fit to Be Read, and he like
Mhm.
worships Greg Egan. So
I personally would only recommend Diaspora to fans of hard sci-fi.
Mhm.
Even though Permutation City is pretty hard sci-fi, I would recommend it to almost any sci-fi reader, as long as you can just tolerate a bit of science. Like, as long as you don't mind just kind of letting 1 or 2 pages of science just kind of wash over you, absorb some through osmosis or not. It doesn't matter because the story is just that good. I will fight for Permutation City for everybody to give it a chance. Diaspora, I think that's for my hard sci-fi readers only.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate the delineation there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that lovely note, I
Yes.
have my last book that I wanted to mention here. And this one is a latecomer to
Ooh,
this list. I just finished it 2 days ago. And
nice.
it's a little bit more on the lighter side than Diaspora, I must say. But
Good.
this is
Good.
my sudden favorite recent release of this year, as it always happens on your channel, Jonathan. You just always get me on that time. But
Yeah,
this is
nice.
a book called Generation Ship by Michael Mame. Mame?
I
Not
don't know. I
sure.
haven't heard of this one. I'm interested. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, so this one is a standalone also. And because it
Excellent.
was such a recent release, I haven't even talked about it on my channel yet.
Ooh, an
Uh,
exclusive.
it's an exclusive,
A
yeah.
Whitney take, hot off the presses.
Well, what really okay, so let me tell you a little bit about this. So this book obviously takes place on a generation ship. I know we're all shocked, okay? And what made this book such a fresh take and something that I haven't seen a whole lot is that instead of concentrating on the start of the journey, the launch, or the end of the journey where we get to the planet, we're actually kind of moderating this back into the time where we see the planet and it's within reachable lifetime distance. I think it's within like a year is when the book starts. So we get to see this how much we have the transformative power of anticipation and how this is changing things on the
Mm,
ship and it's causing all this political upheaval. They're questioning all the rules that were set in place for them to be able to survive. There's tons more crime happening. They're struggling to hold on to the rules. Then we have all these political maneuverings and machinations. We have a hacker character who's trying to both help and create more chaos. Then we also have perspectives from the other side of the story, and that's the scientists who are desperately
mm,
trying to find out information about the planet because it's close, but not quite close enough to know for 100% are we going to get there and be able to live there or not. And people aren't okay with a I don't know answer. They want to know now, even though it's still like many years, like years out or whatever. So
yeah.
they're trying to struggle with all that as well as trying to get the general population who grew up on a ship in metal hallways psychologically ready for an open planet. So there is so
Mm,
much happening in this book, and it was such a fresh take. One that actually reminded me of several episodes of Battlestar Galactica, which was my favorite TV show of all time. And I was
nice.
really impressed with this book, but it isn't there always.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm going to say the last 10% of the book, it was getting higher and higher, and I was so impressed with it. And then the last 10% was just average. It was just a little
Mm,
bit of a letdown for how awesome the rest of the story was. Um, it didn't necessarily ruin the story for me. I'm a big endings kind of person. It was just not as awesomely climactic as I really wanted it to be for this story.
would the book have been better if the last 10% was the prologue, and then everything else?
Hey, maybe, yeah.
The patented Whitney edit. Interesting. No, I like the sound of that. I do think that generation ships are an interesting setting. They're sort of a
Mhm.
rich source of material, and especially if you can kind of take some of those tropes and twist it or add some kind of unexpected things to those kind of character dynamics, situational dynamics. That could be an interesting read.
Yeah. Well, it had like the hacker character, the science character, the political, like there's something in there for everybody. So this one is definitely a high recommend if you're like, I don't know what to read next. that would be what I would recommend.
And is it less than 860 pages?
Yes, it is, and it's an easier read. Let me check
It
right
still
this
looks pretty
second.
big.
See, it's only a mere 583.
Okay. Manage it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just an afternoon, a
Yeah,
light
yeah, just like,
afternoon read.
you can compare them, see? This
Yeah.
one's way better, way better.
You were a bit concerned about being a bit sneaky, sneaking a trilogy in as one of your recommendations. I reckon that trilogy's shorter than both of those other books. I think,
Okay, look, if I put it all there, I don't know, maybe.
yeah, I don't.
I can't tell.
We'll let the internet sleuths deduct that. I'm pretty sure it's at least shorter than Seveneves.
Yeah.
Those foundation books are only like 200 pages or something. Anyway, I like that generation ship. Uh, okay, so I'll be honest, guys. I decided to read more cyberpunk recently because I was in the mood for cyberpunk. And when you
Mhm.
think of cyberpunk, you often think of those neon lights. You think of those kind of grungy, criminal characters. A lot of body modifications. I think like the Cyberpunk 2077 game is probably something that comes to mind. That's sort of the aesthetic that I was going for. I was in the None of the books had that aesthetic. I did a bad job picking cyberpunk books. I picked a lot of good books. They're well regarded, well recommended, and I enjoyed. But they weren't really scratching that itch. I also read Otherland, and oh, you also recently read this one, I believe, Whitney. It is John Brunner's The Shockwave Rider.
Yeah, I think we both read that at very close to the same time.
Yeah,
I had a lot of subscribers say, "Jonathan recommended that one."
yeah. I think we posted videos on the same day. We both talked about Shockwave Rider without knowing that the other had just read Shockwave Rider.
Total
So
bro
that one
rewatch.
kind of had a bit of a proto cyberpunk, kind of pre
Mhm.
neuromancer type feel, but none of them really scratched the itch until I finally got to. And then this one gets a bit crazy, but it scratched the itch that I was looking for, and that is The Quantum Thief by Hanu Ryanemi.
Mm.
So this follows a character who is a thief, and he wakes up and he has to shoot himself, as he is tasked with every day when he wakes up in the Dilemma prison. We also follow a detective character who starts out trying to solve the mystery of the murder of a chocolatier, and that leads him to our thief character known as Jean Le Flambeur. So this book is insane. It has so much personality. I love how it takes certain tropes to do with detectives and criminals, sci-fi and cyberpunk, and just turns them all the way up. It turns the science all the way up. It turns the technological word salad all the way up. I said that Accelerando was number one. Quantum Thief, number two, for a book
Ooh.
with most words that I didn't know the meaning of. And the Quantum Thief has a bit of a reputation for that reason, for being notoriously difficult to read. Now, maybe it's because I had the benefit of just having read Accelerando and Diaspora. I didn't find it that bad. Yes, you're going to see the word gavulot 50 times and be like, what is a gavulot? You're going to hear the word exomemory 50 times, and you're going to be like, what does exomemory mean? Hanu Ryanemi's not going to tell you any of that. You just kind of have to pick it up from context. But he does use the words enough times. They do sort of become clear as you go through the story, through picking up context in the narrative. Things start to come together. You start to piece the puzzle. Like the detective in the story, like the thief trying to figure out how to get away with certain heists, certain adventures, us, the readers, are on our own adventure to make sense of this insane future world that Hanu Ryanemi has created. And it is hard sci fi, but I don't think it is quite as for hard sci fi readers only as the first two books that I mentioned, because it has some familiar tropes to do with we're trying to break out of a jail, or we're trying to steal something from a library, or we're trying to, there's a we'll steal somebody's identity. Even though you might not understand certain words or concepts, there's always a goal to get to. There's a clear plot, there are clear arcs, there are very clear characters, and so even though yes, as a reader, especially in that first like 50 to 100 pages, you might have liked a little bit more hand holding. There's always something pulling you through. A number of times I stopped, not because I was confused, just because I wanted to admire how much fun I was having. A number of times I would think, man, I'm really enjoying this book. Oh man, I got lost. I'm going to have to reread that paragraph. But I don't mind rereading that paragraph because I'm having so much fun doing it. This is
Mm,
honestly just one of the sickest books I've ever read. It's insane. The ideas are awesome. And it's kind of unexpectedly funny at times. It's because it's like a serious, dramatic kind of crime story with like wild future tech. And then every now and again, and I don't know how many if all of these were meant to be funny. Like maybe I'm just funny. Like the I interpret it in a funny way. I'm creating the humor myself. But there were two or three times where I burst out laughing. I was like, this book has it all. Every Despite it having the reputation for arguably being the least readable sci-fi book in history, I recommend that everybody read it. It's awesome.
well, so does that mean that you're gonna read the sequel?
I don't think I've ever done this before. I bought books 2 and 3
Mhm.
before I even finished book 1.
Whoa.
And I
Wow.
never do that because I'm really big on endings. Like, you know how some people go, I like the ending, sorry, I like the journey, the ending kind of flopped, but that doesn't matter to me. To me,
Mhm,
it does. Like, it's not going
mhm,
to ruin the whole book. It's not going to drop it from a 5 star to like a 1 star.
mhm.
But yeah, might drop it from a 5 star to a 4 star if I don't like the ending. So I get a
Oh,
little bit nervous, like
I
investing
get
my
that.
money too
I get
early.
that, yeah. Mhm.
I had confidence. I was like, I'm having so much fun. I need to know that books 2 and 3 are on the way right now.
Wow. Well, Jonathan, I think that you just hit all-time sci-fi status. I mean, your ultimate recommendation is you were like, "I'm confused the whole time, but I liked it. It was great, you guys. It was great."
Yeah. It
Your all-time sci-fi thermometer is going off right now. That's awesome.
it would be interesting to see my reaction to this if I had not read much sci-fi. If I had read this
Mhm,
earlier in my sci-fi journey,
mhm,
I still think that I would have liked it just because some really cool stuff happens.
mhm,
But I think to get me through those periods of confusion, having
mhm,
a little bit of sci-fi knowledge to kind of pull onto, say, I might not fully understand this, but I've kind of heard of that topic before. It
mhm,
might just kind of help you get to the next chapter. So I maybe wouldn't recommend it if it's your first sci-fi book ever.
mhm.
But I think if you have any sort of tolerance for that kind of thing, give it a go. And even though it is pretty hard sci-fi, I think it might even appeal to fantasy fans because the technology is just so wild. Some of the characters seem almost godlike,
Hmm.
and I think that could sort of appeal to sort of the fantastical nature of things that draw in fantasy readers. So there you go. Even fantasy readers should give this a go.
I must say, Jonathan, you do a great pitch because now I'm like, well, my pride as a like science fiction reader is now like on the line, and I'm like, well, I have to try it now because Jonathan says everyone's gonna like it.
Well,
Oh, oh, oh.
a ton of people have quit this book after 50 pages. I'm not guaranteeing everybody's going to like it. I just think everybody should try it because I think, even though I know that this is not going to work for everyone, I think the people that it does work for, it's really, really going to work for. And I personally would rather read a 5 out of 10 book and a 10 out of 10 book than a 7 and an 8. I can't guarantee you that which one this is going to be for you. It might be the 5, it might be the 10, but I think it's worth it just to have the shot at getting that 10
So
out of
you
10
need the
experience.
extremes. You're an extreme reader. You're
Yeah.
like, I either want to hate it or I want to love it.
I want to love everything, but I'll accept the misses to get to those special moments.
Well, I see. I see.
Awesome.
Well,
Well,
hey, those are some great recommendations. I will get to that. You know, ironically, that book has been on my TBR list for since I started my channel. Actually, like I think it was like my third video ever. I talk about how it was on my TBR when I did heist books.
oh,
Um,
nice.
but
Good subgenre.
you know, the ever expanding TBR, just more and more books got stacked on top of it, and now I'm pretty sure it's somewhere in the next room on the floor at the bottom of a stack. Like, I don't know even where it is.
Yes, I think I bought this a year ago, and I
Mhm,
was a little nervous to try it. I was prioritizing other things because of its reputation, but
mhm.
I'm glad I gave it a go. I hope you guys do too. I know there's going to be some people in the comments saying that they hated it, and that's okay because I know it's not for everybody. But I hope there's at least a couple of people in the comments saying that they loved it too, because I think this book's crazy good.
Well, that's okay. They can always read the Foundation series, and then
Yes.
they can tell us about that, so it's fine.
Yeah, they'll be like, I hated the Quantum Thief, and book two is the best Foundation book. And I'm like, all right, go subscribe to Whitney at the Secret Source of Storycraft. She's got all
Hey,
the
I
good
may not
takes.
hate the Quantum Thief. I may be fine with it. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, you'll have to come back and let me know.
I will.
Awesome. Well, there you go, guys. Let us know your thoughts on these books. We hope you enjoyed the cyberpunk slash space opera discussion. And go over to Whitney's channel, Secret Source of Storycraft, and check out all of her awesome videos as well. Thank you for joining us, Whitney.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Hope you enjoy, guys. We'll see you next time. And you can find more sci fi content over here.